Good morning, everyone. We are continuing with our living intuitively. Let's start with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Show us the way to live according to the highest that is within us. All spiritual understanding is directional, so point us in the right direction, that all the energy we put out, all the actions we take, will draw us closer to Thee, instead of embroiling us ever deeper in confusion and delusion. We are your loving children. Help us to feel your presence around us, guiding and blessing us at all times. Om, peace. Amen. This is being recorded at the beginning of January 2021. There have been some really dramatic events in the USA. I live in California. Over these last days, I took a little break from these morning recordings. So during the most dramatic moments, I wasn't speaking in this forum, but I did speak at our temple for our Sunday morning service on January 10. So if any of you would be curious as to what I might say in that context, you can go to the Ananda Palo Alto site, or better to Asha's YouTube channel, and you'll find commentary there. Divine Mother, I think, is playing with all of Master's devotees right now, because in the District of Columbia, where the U.S. Capitol is located, because of the tumultuous events, the chief of the local police there resigned and was replaced by a woman whose name is Yogananda. Her first name is Yogananda Pittman. We know nothing else more about her, but it was almost like Divine Mother was just patting those who understood on the head and saying, "Don't worry, it's fine." We have no idea whether she actually has some connection to Master's Ray, or whether the name is a coincidence. I use that word. But I was remembering that when Master was alive and teaching, traveling, he was unable to speak to both Black and white people in D.C. because it was too close to the South. So he started a self-realization group for, the word at that time was Negroes, for African Americans. And there's some wonderful pictures. And of course, Master's skin was very dark, so he looks more like that audience than he does with his light-skinned audiences. Very fine, some very fine portraits. So perhaps this woman is actually in some way connected to that lineage, or else her mother, her father just liked the sound of the name. Who knows? But even though, whatever the meaning of it actually is, it's very sweet when Divine Mother cracks the veil a little bit and just pushes through and reminds us, "Don't worry, I'm in charge." Anyway, lovely. There was a beautiful story that Ananda told about an event when he was in charge of the Sacramento Center, how Master just made everything work out, how everything worked out perfectly. And then Ananda felt very strongly Master's arm around him. I couldn't remember the exact words. I said that Master had said, "I've got your back," but that is a little too colloquial, and it seems unlikely that Master actually said that. I think what Master said is, "Don't worry, I have it covered," which is really what it is. And don't worry, they do have it covered, all of it, which is why we're having this whole discussion, because living intuitively is to live in harmony with the awareness that we are acting in cooperation with a higher reality. And even though we may feel at times that we're here all on our own, and the only thing we have to deal with is our own little ego, it's just simply false. It's just not the truth. And what we're really trying to do, living intuitively, is to say to live more in harmony with higher realities, because higher realities are more true than lower realities. Lower realities exist. We can't deny that they're here. Um, but a greater revelation of truth gives us more wisdom and more security. Now, in the last couple of days, I've been talking about living intuitively versus how to tune in to your higher guidance. And I've pulled up this, moth-eaten old file that I've been carrying around for decades and talking about the famous 22 points in here that are all taken from Swami's wonderful talk on the subject. And I actually realize now that I have finally, in my own mind, straightened out what I'm actually doing, I'm going to go back to this folder because there is really a great deal that's helpful. So I've already included a number of things from here, but now I want to just start somewhat systematically and make sure I cover what's important. So the first 2 points I have covered at length, not the fact that our likes and dislikes create static in our receptivity, and we can only hear what we're able to hear, not what Master would want to tell us. That's St. John's comment to all who received him. Jesus could only give what a person was open to receive. God's light and love and wisdom is always is unconditioned and unchanging, eternal and constant. The only variable is the degree to which we open to receive it. So and what closes us off is that dissonant realities within us create static. And so our hearing, our receptivity, our sight is clouded. Shadow comes between us and the light. Our likes and dislikes and all that implies, which I've talked to about a great deal already, is the first factor to consider. Why, when I was in that dilemma, why is it hard for me to hear God's will? It's because I don't want to hear it. I mean, that's quite a humbling thing to have to say, that I don't want to hear it. But I don't, because it's too challenging and it's too contradictory to my own desires. It's too fearful, just too fearful. Like, if this is what God wants of me and I'm committed to do what God wants, it's a road I don't want to go down. Lo, though my path go through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art always with me. But it does feel like that, the dark valley. And it takes a lot of time and experience before we're willing to accept that without resistance. So we have to learn to discipline that. And then I talked about self-honesty and humility, and our place in the universe, which is who am I, which is all a means of calming the static of likes and dislikes, because it's protective self-interest, protective self-definition. If God's guidance to us contradicts our self-concept, it's very hard to hear it because it's too scary. So the more humble we are, the more, and humility is self-honesty, the more honest we can be about our own reality, that I'm just not better than this. I would like to be, and someday I will be, but all of that wishful thinking will not necessarily make me someone I'm not. And of course, the comfort in that is the seed has to go through every stage before it becomes an apple tree. If an apple tree is what the seed is destined to be, you can't skip a stage. And in order, in fact, for the tree to be really strongly rooted and be able to stand, as Master said, unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds, every developmental stage of that has to be gone through and has to be made appropriately. I am by no means, I have no experience in carpentry and building, but I have friends who have done a lot of that. And I was just talking to a friend recently about building a house. And I was thinking how enjoyable that project would be. just because of what you have in the end. But no builder is going to cut corners, because you cut corners and the thing is a mess, just a total mess, and sometimes a disastrous mess. But you build it if you make every stage solid, then you end up with something that will stand for generations. I mean, us too, with our spiritual life. So now we come to the point which is basically that the phrase that Swami uses a lot, and it's worth contemplating if the meaning of it is not obvious to you right away. The phrase Swami uses is energy has its own intelligence. And that's a prelude to saying you should act on what you know. Because if you merely wait for the whole picture to be filled in, okay, I'll put it like this. I'll put the experience that I had when I first came to Ananda. As I've mentioned to you many times, I was introduced to the principles of self-realization just before my 19th birthday through the writings of Vivekananda, and then Vivekananda's guru, a great avatar named Sri Ramakrishna, who died in 1893, I think, in the late 1800s in India. And Ramakrishna is an ever-living master, not ever living in a physical body, but as an avatar, his consciousness is completely accessible to us. I was deeply magnetized through Vivekananda to Ramakrishna. And Vedanta Society temples, there was one in San Francisco and one in Los Angeles, the two cities that I was living in or near during this period of time. They have lovely temples and dedicated swamis, some Americans but at that time, but almost every swami that I met was an Indian at that time. And I would attend their services, go to their places, be very inspired by what they offered. And I formed, and I still have, a deep relationship in my heart with Sri Ramakrishna. In 1987, when we went to India for the first time and went to the Kali temple in Dakshineshwar, outside of Calcutta, the Kali temple where Ramakrishna lived most of his adult life and where his beautiful Leela took place, and then the Kazipur garden house where Sri Ramakrishna left his body. They were extraordinary experiences for me. I'd had so many years of relationship. To be able to go to those holy places was just beyond words to express how profoundly moving it was. That was 87. That was a long time later. So in 1969, when I met Swami Kriyananda, and he, of course, is a disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda. Now, Yogananda had great respect for Ramakrishna and honored him in every way. But it was a different lineage. I recently learned the word sampradaya. I learned it in the context of the fact that Jesus spent 18 years in India and created a whole, was very well known and created a whole flow of energy in India and was recognized as a great avatar and accepted on those terms. And he was easily accepted because in India they understand the concept of sampradaya, which is to say a particular lineage of Sanatana Dharma that is equal to all lineages, just a different expression through a different jiva, through a different avatar. So Ramakrishna and Paramhansa Yogananda, although by no means in competition and in complete harmony with each other in terms of the teaching, were yet two different sampradayas, which is lineages. And I had never took any initiation in regard to Ramakrishna because it never occurred to me to do so. I'm not sure what the process would have been. The process wasn't obvious, but it never occurred to me to investigate. It was just my heart. So I meet Swami Kriyananda. I have absolute instant recognition that this man is the key to my future. This consciousness that he represents is the pole star I've been looking for, as I called it yesterday. But he's a disciple of Yogananda, and everything about what he's offering is from Yogananda. I had Autobiography of a Yogi, but I was a bit of a snob, and I felt that all the miracles in Yogananda's book, and to a certain extent the childlike devotion, uh, I was not able to relate to it. So I read a little bit of that book, but not much. Then I met Swami Kriyananda and was so magnetized by him, and he was a disciple of Yogananda. So I went and got Autobiography again, and it was so interesting. I loved it. I loved it right from the start. It was like I needed Swami's intercession. And it was not as if I was well educated by that point through Swami or anything like that, because it was right at the beginning. But being so receptive to Swami Kriyananda, I became receptive to what he really is. Swamiji is the open window for Yogananda's vibration. And I was able to receive Yogananda's vibration as Kriyananda. But what I was receiving, as Swamiji himself would constantly assert, is he was nothing but a channel for his guru. So that when I went back to Yogananda, to his guru at that time, it just made perfect sense to me. I felt perfectly in tune with it. First miracle of the whole cycle. And of course, I wanted to move to Ananda. It took me a while to sort out my own karma, but I was determined to go and live at Ananda. There was no question. If Swami Kriyananda had lived in an igloo in Antarctica, I would have gotten a little igloo in Antarctica. There was no question about it. It was very simple. Swami Kriyananda lives there. I will live there. That's it. Whatever the there was, the fact that it was a wonderful community with a retreats and all these other things was terrific. But it was not, as they say in the law, was not dispositive of the issues. It didn't dispose of the issues. That wasn't the reason. But it was a perk. It was a giant, marvelous perk. So here I am, I'm going to go, and I know now Kriya Yoga is the practice, discipleship to Yogananda is the culture. And I have this deep heart relationship with Ramakrishna. And I really just didn't know what to do. But it was perfectly clear to me. There was just not the slightest doubt that I needed to be where Swami Kriyananda was. Everything after that was a kind of mystery. And this was not a small issue for me, because Yogananda was unknown, although I had grown fond of him through his book. Ramakrishna was deeply known to me. But I knew what my next step was. And I didn't know how the contradictions would resolve. And the way I thought about it was this, which is the reason I didn't know how the contradiction would resolve is because it was not resolvable with the rational mind, nor was it completely resolvable with the heart, because I had tremendous heart for Swami Kriyananda and tremendous heart for Ramakrishna. Was that a contradiction? I couldn't logically see how it was going to come together. And I certainly didn't want to be disloyal to the one who had brought me this far. It was all very confusing. But I realized the reason I couldn't sort it out is because I didn't have the intuition to sort it out. There was too much mental static. So how do I get clearer intuition? Well, I can sort of sit on the sidelines of the issue and wait for clearer intuition to come. But it was hard for me to see how doing nothing would deepen my intuition. Just my very, very logical self said, 3 years of waiting up until now has not really solved an issue for me. And now, this pole star has been offered to me, but there are contradictions, seemingly serious contradictions. But if I just sit here and wait, not much is going to happen. Also, a gift has been given to me. And that gift was the guidance of Swami Kriyananda. And if over what in many ways might be a quibbling objection, I failed to embrace that gift. And I believe I talked about this in an earlier episode about prosperity and gratitude and making best use of what's given to us is also a fundamental principle of intuitive living, is to to use what you have, rather than say, but I want something else. There's a story in Yogananda's life with one of his disciples when he was passing out roses for some kind of a ceremony, and he handed a woman, whatever color he handed her, a pink rose, let's say, as an example, and she said, "But I want a yellow one." And Yogananda looked at her and he said rather sternly, "What I give, you take." And that was a way of saying, we can't say, no, I want it to be like this. No, what the Guru gives, we take. I didn't have clarity about who had given me Swami at that point, but God had certainly given him. So do I say, well, I don't know, he's not a disciple of Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna is who I've been following. I don't know about this Yogananda fellow. What should I do? I didn't see any magnetism in that. And just, again, on a practical level, I didn't see where greater intuition and understanding would come except by developing myself. And there was no question in my mind that residence at Ananda and proximity to Swami Kriyananda would serve to open me to higher levels of awareness and to deeper understanding. So I committed myself as if I knew what I was doing, because I knew partly what I was doing. I'd been given this opportunity with Swami, and I trusted, and this is where it also came. I trusted. I didn't think that Yogananda and Ramakrishna were going to be fighting over me as to who got to be my guru, or the opposite, each of them trying to offload me onto someone else. I just didn't have any idea. I know there's no competition. That's not really how it's done. They're not fighting in heaven to see which avatar has the most followers. It's just people on this plane actually behave like that. But they are not true representatives of their masters when they think like that. Even when Master was living, and someone said something about, how many people came to his talks. Yogananda said, "I'm not a merchant counting the customers in my shop." He said, "I love all souls." He said, "I love crowds of souls, but I love each soul individually. That's the truth of what I'm doing." So, of course, there's no competition in that respect. I've always followed that. Although I'm always interested, if who comes and who doesn't come, but I never count. I mean, I literally don't count. If inspiration is there, that's all that matters. And if it's one or two people in the room, the whole. I've never attracted large crowds, but I've attracted good. I've had the opportunity to be in the company of many sincere souls and have built many wonderful spiritual friendships over the years. That's what matters. It's not a scorecard. So I was quite sure that I was in a true environment. See, that's important. The first time I went to visit Ananda Village, which was in August of 1970, and I remember arriving. It was very hot, dry summer, as it always was. And I remember opening the car door, and I wore these sandals that I just had the style of sandal that I would have made by a shoemaker. And they were biblical looking. I mean, nowadays you can buy all these things, but back in those days, that kind of clothing was not readily available. So I always had these sandals that I'd had made for myself. They were biblical looking, and it was just sort of part of the gestalt. And so I had this barefoot in this rather biblical leather sandal, and I opened the car door, and I remember seeing my foot, and my foot touched the ground, which was this very fine red dust, and just putting my sandal down there created this cloud of red dust, which I watched, sort of. Honestly, it was evocative of who knows how many lifetimes. Now that I've been to Israel a number of times and have renewed both a kind of sense of ancient Judaism as well as the incarnation of Jesus, when I see that foot hitting that dust, I think I was seeing many lifetimes. It was so powerful. Anyway, it hit the dust. And one of my concerns was, I was 23 by that point, but I'd already run through a number of things that should have lasted longer than they did, because I became disillusioned with their potential. They weren't corrupt. They didn't have the power of idealism. But my foot hit the dust, and again, intuition just spoke to me. It said, this place is true, it will never disappoint you. And that also has been a true reality. So I had a certain number of certainties. And so I was obligated by my own personal integrity to act on what I did know. And I simply took my mind away from what I didn't know. And I literally said to Yogananda and to Ramakrishna, you guys sort this out. And I just put it aside. It just wasn't my issue. It was they had to sort this out because I knew certain things were unequivocally true. I knew who Swami was, and I knew that Ananda belonged to me, or that I needed to be there. And that was enough. And the rest of it, who knows? And then I behaved as if. I behaved as if it was perfectly clear to me. And I remember when in the September of 71, I don't know the exact date, when Swami Kriyananda, who was the only one then who initiated into Kriya, was giving a Kriya initiation, I remember asking him if I could take Kriya. Now, discipleship to Yogananda was part of that, and I somehow expected a conversation. I asked him if I could take Kriya. Swami says, of course, like that. It was a very short conversation. And it was sort of like, I thought there might be issues. It was September, I'd moved on June 1st. And he just said, of course. And I remember thinking at the time, okay, I trust Swami, and this is what he said. And I had made a resolution that I wasn't going to fight the battle. I wasn't going to try to sort it out because I didn't feel I knew any more than I had known a few months earlier. But I trusted Swami, I trusted Ananda, and this is what happened next. Act on what you know. Now, I have to say, you see, I had a lot of faith in myself. It wasn't really that I trusted Swami, I trusted myself. I trusted that even though I didn't have full intuition on what was happening, I had enough intuition that was irrefutable. And I didn't allow what I didn't know to take away from me what I did know. But nor did I exaggerate what I did know. I didn't make myself secure by expanding on it. I held exactly to what was clear to me, but I held wholeheartedly to what was clear to me. Now, this is where Swami says energy has its own intelligence. And this means if you put out energy, if you act with integrity, with conscientiousness, with awareness, you activate a flow of energy, and that flow of energy itself begins to enlighten you. In other words, you put out energy, and you can just look at it. You don't have to be all woo-woo about it. If you do something, you have experiences, and those experiences affect your consciousness. And if you're paying attention, then they affect your consciousness in a way that leads to greater awareness. So if Swami felt I could take Kriya, I could, with integrity, take Kriya. It was really his decision, not mine. Many years later, it got to be sort of a joke between us when Swami would say, Asha, hello, Asha, how are you? I would say, I don't know, sir. How am I? And it was a real response. It was also a joke, but it was a real response. I don't know, sir. How am I? If you think I can take Kriya, I'll take Kriya. So I did. And I recall it was about a year after I had begun to live at Ananda Village, not giving the issue hardly any thought. I just literally, I woke up one morning and this was in my mind, of course, Yogananda is your guru. Just like that. And that was the end. And then I later learned the wonderful phrase, which I wished I had known sooner, Upaguru. Upaguru is it can be a Satguru, meaning a true avatar, a Satguru, but only temporarily. I felt like I wasn't ready for Kriyananda, for Yogananda. And so they tossed me over to Ramakrishna, who kind of did the first spade work and got me to the point where I could meet Swami and I could move on to my true life destiny. And thus, all loyalties are justified. And all of the intuitions I felt were true. So for this morning, that's as far as we'll go. God bless you.